My name is Helen Crawford. I'm 67 years old, and until last year I thought quiet endurance was the same thing as peace. For 40 years I worked, cooked, counted, and carried the weight of a family that believed I owed them everything. I used to think that one day, when the children were grown, gratitude would find its way back home. But gratitude, I've learned, is a visitor that doesn't come uninvited. It was a Sunday evening in late autumn, the kind of day when the wind smells faintly of wood smoke and endings. My daughter-in-law, Clara, had organised a family dinner at their new house, 3 stories tall, white marble floors, chandeliers that looked like melting stars. She wanted to celebrate the company's growth, though what she really meant was celebrating themselves. I wore my old cardigan, pale blue with small pearl buttons. It had belonged to Arthur, my husband. I could feel the shape of his memory in the threads. When I arrived, the laughter was already loud. Glasses clinked. My 2 sons, David and Mark, stood near the bar, arguing about which luxury car had the better engine. Their wives smiled with polished teeth. The table was set with more silver than food. I took a seat at the far end, unnoticed, and folded my napkin carefully, the way I used to fold the company's balance sheets. Neat, invisible, exact. "Mum, you finally made it," Mark said. "We were wondering if the bus was late again." He grinned, waiting for the laughter, and it came. Soft, cruel, collective. Clara raised her glass. "To Mum," she said brightly, "the only person I know who can work 40 years and still manage to stay broke." The words floated across the table like a feather dipped in poison. I smiled, the kind of smile that hides behind years of discipline. "Some riches don't fit in a bank account," I said quietly. No one heard, or maybe they pretended not to. Dinner began. Between bites of roasted lamb and expensive wine, they talked about expansion plans for the company, about hiring a new marketing director, about buying a vacation villa in Spain. My granddaughter scrolled her phone, occasionally glancing at me like I was a relic from a museum, still functional, but irrelevant. David leaned back and said, "Mum, you should see how well the business is doing since we took over. No offence, but numbers move faster when young blood's in charge." His wife laughed too loudly. "We're modernising everything. Remember those old ledgers you used to keep? We tossed them out last week. Everything's digital now." For a moment, my fork paused mid-air. Those ledgers weren't just paper. They were 40 years of my handwriting, the quiet evidence of every late night Arthur and I spent balancing bills so the company wouldn't collapse. I wanted to ask which one of them had learned to calculate profit margins without checking the tax code twice, but instead I reached for my tea. The teacup had a hairline crack running down its side, and every time I lifted it, a small drop escaped, trailing warmth onto my fingers. It reminded me of myself, still useful, though time had left its mark. Clara poured herself another glass of wine and said, "We were actually talking about moving you somewhere more comfortable, Mum. Maybe a senior residence near the lake. You'd have people your own age to talk to." She smiled, pretending kindness. "You wouldn't have to worry about bills anymore. We could sell your little house and invest the money properly." I looked at her, at the diamond ring flashing under the chandelier light, and wondered if she knew the mortgage she bragged about paying once had been signed using my savings. I wanted to tell her that the word comfortable has different meanings. Some are made of peace, others of pity. "I'm fine where I am," I said. "That house still has Arthur's laugh in the walls." "Oh, Mum," David said with a sigh, "you really need to let go of the past. Dad's company is in good hands. We're taking it places you never imagined." I watched his mouth move and saw my own youth in him. The same determination, but none of the gratitude. I could have told him that every place he was taking the company had been mapped out years before he even learned multiplication. Instead, I nodded, the way women nod when the world confuses arrogance for confidence. After dessert, they brought out champagne. Clara insisted on a toast. "To progress, to success, and to the future of Crawford Logistics," she declared. Then she added, almost playfully, "And to Mum, the quiet investor of emotional support." Laughter again. My granddaughter took a photo. I heard the shutter click like a small betrayal. I thought of the nights Arthur and I ate reheated stew because a client's payment was late. Of how I stayed up with swollen eyes, recalculating numbers until dawn. Of how I signed every insurance policy, every renewal, every lease, because Arthur's handwriting was too shaky after his heart attack. When you've lived long enough, humiliation stops burning. It just sinks deeper, turning into something heavier. That evening, I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I simply observed them the way an old librarian watches children toss books onto the floor. They think stories will rearrange themselves. David walked me to the door afterward, half-hearted politeness. "You really should think about that residence idea," he sipped. "Aid. It'd be better for everyone." "Everyone but me," I replied. He shrugged and kissed my cheek mechanically. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. My car, a modest sedan I'd kept since Arthur's days, waited quietly at the curb. As I turned the key, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror, silver hair escaping from its bun, eyes still steady. I whispered to myself, "Poor," they said. The word didn't hurt anymore. It echoed like a riddle waiting to be solved. On the drive home, the city lights blurred through the windshield. I remembered the early years, how Arthur used to say, "One day this company will take care of them all." He never imagined them all would forget who took care of it first. At a red light, I imagined him sitting beside me, hands folded on his lap, patient as ever. They don't know, I thought. They never looked at the last page. When I reached home, the silence welcomed me. My small house smelled of paper and lavender soap. On the kitchen shelf, an old photograph of Arthur smiled under a thin layer of dust. I ran a cloth over the frame, the same way I used to smooth creases on his shirts. "They laughed again tonight," I told him. "The same laugh you warned me about. The kind that grows louder when it feels safest." I boiled water for tea. The cracked cup waited. Steam rose, curling like memory, and I let the warmth fill my palms. I thought about all the times I'd chosen silence over pride, endurance over anger. Maybe that was my mistake. Or maybe it was my strength. I sat at the table, opened my old leather notebook, the one they'd call outdated, and ran my fingers across the faded ink. Each number had a heartbeat, each page a memory. My handwriting was smaller now, but steadier than theirs would ever be. Outside, wind brushed against the windows, soft and insistent. I took another sip of tea and smiled faintly. They believed I was powerless because I no longer raised my voice. They forgot that true power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just waits for the right day, the right witness, the right silence to end. Tomorrow, I would visit the bank, as I did every first Monday of the month. Just a routine visit, they would think. An old woman checking her balance. No one would guess that those visits kept something far greater than numbers alive. I turned off the lights, leaving the kitchen in a soft amber glow. The cracked cup rested in the sink, a thin ring of tea marking the place where warmth had ended. It looked fragile, but hadn't broken yet. Neither had I. When I went to bed, the laughter from dinner still echoed faintly, but it no longer hurt. It sounded distant, like rain hitting another roof. I whispered into the dark, "Let them laugh, Arthur. Tomorrow the world will still spin, and some truths will start to wake up." Then I closed my eyes, steady, patient, certain that morning would arrive carrying something they had never imagined. The quiet strength of a woman they had mistaken for poor. When I woke the next morning, the house smelled of dust and rain. The sky was grey, the kind of grey that blurs edges and makes time feel slower. I made myself oatmeal, plain, no sugar, the same way Arthur liked it. Old habits stay even when the person who started them doesn't. As I ate, I stared at the empty chair across the table and remembered the first day we sat there together, two young people with big hopes and small pockets. I was 27 when Arthur and I opened Crawford Logistics. It wasn't even a company then, just a tiny office with peeling wallpaper and a single desk we bought second-hand. He drove the trucks himself. I handled the numbers. He used to joke that I was the real engine of the business. Without you, he'd say, these trucks would run on promises instead of fuel. Those early years were hard, but they were ours. I can still hear the sound of him coming home at midnight, boots heavy with road dust, voice tired but gentle. I'd spread invoices across the table and he'd pour coffee into chipped mugs. "One more year," he'd whisper, "and things will get easier." 1 year turned into 10. 10 turned into 40. We raised 2 boys during those years. David came first, serious, ambitious, always asking why we didn't buy new things. Then came Mark, softer, dreamier, more like me. When other families went on vacations, we stayed home to save for truck repairs. I taught the boys how to balance a checkbook before they could drive. "You can't steer a life you don't account for," I used to tell them. They'd laugh, thinking it was one of Mum's boring lessons. I never minded the sacrifices. There's a strange pride in doing what must be done even when no one claps for it. I worked double hours, took bookkeeping courses at night, handled every tax deadline when Arthur's health began to fail. He trusted me completely. Once, while signing a stack of renewal papers, he said, "If anything ever happens to me, Helen, you'll know what to do." I thought he meant paying bills, not surviving grief. Arthur passed away on a February morning, heart failure, quick and cruel. The house felt enormous afterward. For weeks I walked from room to room, touching things he had touched, the back of the chair, the coffee pot, his hat hanging by the door. The business suddenly became a battlefield of paperwork and condolences. That's when David stepped in. He was 32, full of energy, already calling himself operations director. I didn't correct him. Maybe I should have. Grief makes you too gentle at the wrong moments. He promised to handle everything and asked me to rest. I believed him. I thought he'd honour his father's work. But slowly my role changed. They stopped asking my opinion on contracts. Meetings happened without me. My desk moved from the main office to a smaller one to give the younger team more space. The first time they presented a yearly report, my name was missing from the acknowledgement page. "Mum, you don't need to stress about these details," David said. "You've done enough. Let us carry it now." Enough. The word landed heavier than it sounded. After 40 years, enough felt like exile. Still, I tried to believe they meant well. I cooked lunch for the staff on Fridays, brought in pies during holidays. Everyone smiled politely, but I could sense the whisper underneath, that I was part of the company's past, not its present. Mark tried to mediate. "Don't take it personally, Mum," he said once. "David's just trying to modernize." "I know," I told him, "but modernizing shouldn't mean erasing. When the grandchildren were born, I shifted my focus to them. Maybe love needed a quieter place to live. I babysat, sewed clothes, attended school plays. I learned to live in the background. That's where women like me are most comfortable, until comfort starts to suffocate." One afternoon, about 5 years after Arthur's death, I found myself at the office again. I had gone to drop off homemade cookies. The receptionist was new. She didn't recognize me. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm Helen Crawford," I said. "Arthur Crawford's widow." "Oh," she said with a nervous laugh. "Of course. Mr. David mentioned you. You're the founder's wife." Founder's wife, not co-founder, not accountant, not partner, just wife. I smiled anyway and handed her the cookies. "Tell them I stopped by," I said. That evening, I sat on my porch and watched the streetlights flicker on. The sky turned the same colour as the cardigan I wore at the dinner last night, that soft blue that almost disappears at dusk. I thought about how easily people forget the hands that built their comfort. We spend half our lives proving loyalty, and the other half realising loyalty is rarely returned. Still, I didn't blame them. Maybe they truly believed I had no part in their success. The company had grown beyond our little office. It had new buildings, new trucks, a glossy website. My handwriting was nowhere to be seen. But there were reminders only I could recognize. The old company seal, still bearing my initials from when Arthur asked me to notarize documents. The safety protocols I wrote by hand. The tax structure I built to save them during the recession. My fingerprints were woven through every brick they now bragged about. I kept every receipt, every contract, every renewal form Arthur ever signed. I didn't know why at the time. Perhaps habit, perhaps foresight. They filled 3 wooden boxes in the attic, neatly labelled. Whenever life felt heavy, I'd open one and read. Paper remembers what people forget. Years passed. The boys prospered. I aged. The business flourished, but my house stayed the same. A modest porch, a squeaky gate, the smell of rose fertilizer drifting through spring mornings. I never wanted luxury. What I wanted was acknowledgement, the quiet kind that doesn't need applause, just truth. Then came the day I overheard Clara talking to a neighbour. I was watering the roses when I heard her voice drift through the hedge. "She still keeps that old place," she said. "Imagine working your whole life and ending up with nothing. Poor woman. Poor woman." The phrase stung more than I expected. It wasn't the insult itself, it was the certainty behind it, the way pity can feel like theft. That night I went through Arthur's belongings again. His handwriting was fading on most papers, but one envelope stood out, thicker, sealed, with my name written across it. I'd seen it before, tucked in the bottom drawer, but never opened it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were the original ownership documents of Crawford Logistics, the final transfer Arthur had signed before his last hospitalization. The signatures were clear, his and mine. My name was listed as the sole beneficiary and majority shareholder. My breath caught. For decades I'd thought those papers were merely sentimental keepsakes, but they were the deed itself, the foundation of everything my sons called theirs. I sat in silence, hearing the distant tick of the wall clock. For years, I had worked out of duty, not ambition. I'd believed ownership didn't matter as long as the family thrived. But in that moment, I realized what Arthur must have understood before he died. Protection sometimes means truth held in secret. He must have known how easily greed grows in the soil of entitlement. That's why he left the papers with me, not them. He trusted that I'd use them when the time was right, not for revenge, but for restoration. Tears rolled down my face, not from joy, but from exhaustion. 40 years of quiet labour had come to this, proof that I wasn't invisible after all. I placed the papers back in the envelope and locked them inside the cedar chest under my bed. Then I sat there, staring at the floorboards, thinking about how silence can be both shield and prison. The next morning, I went about life as usual. I washed dishes, fed the stray cat that lingered by my fence, wrote small notes in my ledger. No one could have guessed that a revolution was sleeping inside that chest. Weeks later, David stopped by to ask if I wanted to invest in one of his new ventures. He explained that they were opening an office abroad and needed extra capital. "You'd be helping the family legacy," he said smoothly. I looked at him, at his confident smile, the expensive watch on his wrist, and thought how strange it was to see my own sacrifice worn as his accessory. "I'll think about it," I told him. After he left, I opened the envelope again. My hands were steadier this time. I studied every signature, every date, and realized how easily they had forgotten who had done the real work. For 40 years I'd been the backbone that bent so the rest could stand taller, and they had mistaken my bending for weakness. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "They mocked what they never built, but one day they will read their names on papers that don't belong to them." I didn't know when that day would come. I only knew it was closer than they imagined. Life continued in its quiet rhythm, I attended birthdays, smiled through conversations, listened to plans I was never invited to join. Yet inside, something had shifted. The same humility they once mistook for naivety had turned into calm precision. Every insult became a line in a silent ledger of its own. When I saw them celebrating promotions and profits, I didn't feel envy anymore, only curiosity. How long could illusion survive before truth demanded attention? In the evenings, I'd make tea, open Arthur's old briefcase, and reread the documents. They smelled faintly of ink and time. Sometimes I'd whisper, "Not yet, my love. Let them laugh a little longer. The lesson will taste stronger that way." The chest remained locked, but I started visiting the lawyer Arthur once trusted, an old friend named Mr. Hawthorne. He greeted me kindly. "It's been years, Helen. How are you managing?" "I'm fine," I said. "I just need some advice on inheritance documentation." He nodded, scanning the papers. His brows lifted slightly. "You do realize what this means, don't you? The company is legally yours. Completely." I smiled faintly. "I know. I just wanted to hear it out loud." He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you planning to tell them?" "Not yet," I said. Some truths need to ripen. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The same roads that once led me to exhaustion now felt like pathways toward justice. Not revenge, justice. There's a difference. As the sun set behind the hills, golden light poured through the windshield. I whispered to Arthur's memory, "You chose right, my love. You knew I'd wait until silence could speak for itself." When I parked in front of my house, I stayed inside the car for a moment, watching the porch light flicker on automatically. A small, loyal glow. I thought about everything that light had seen. Laughter, loss, betrayal, perseverance. And soon, it would witness truth. I locked the documents back in the chest that night. Then I stood before the mirror and studied my reflection, lined, silver-haired, unbent. For 40 years I had lived as if belonging meant serving. Now I knew better. Belonging isn't what you're given, it's what you build. They could call me poor all they wanted. The truth sat quietly under my bed, waiting for its turn to be heard. And when that day came, I promised Arthur it wouldn't come with anger. It would come with calm. The kind of calm that unsettles even the loudest laughter. I turned off the lamp, letting the darkness settle softly around me. Tomorrow would be ordinary again, but the ordinary had changed forever. Beneath it, something powerful had begun to breathe. If Helen's story touched your heart, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Have you ever given your all to people who didn't see your worth? Subscribe for more stories where mothers like Helen finally find the respect they always deserved. It was supposed to be a celebration. That's what Clara called it. A milestone event. My grandson Ethan had just gotten engaged to a young woman from a well-known family, and the Crawfords were eager to show that they were a lineage of success, class, and wealth. The invitations were gold embossed. The venue, a rented ballroom in the city's oldest hotel, sparkled like it was dipped in pride. I stood by the mirror before leaving home, adjusting the pearl brooch Arthur had given me on our 25th anniversary. My hands trembled slightly as I pinned it to my jacket. I had worn this same brooch at his funeral, not for decoration, but as armor. Every woman needs a quiet weapon. Mine had always been composure. When I arrived, the room was overflowing with light and noise. A jazz band played near the stage, waiters glided through the crowd with champagne, and the air smelled of perfume and money. My son stood near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced smiles. Clara spotted me and waved. "Mom, you made it!" Her voice carried that overly bright cheerfulness that polite cruelty often wears. She hugged me lightly, careful not to smudge her makeup, then whispered, "Try to stay seated, okay? We have a lot of guests tonight, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed." "I'll manage," I said softly. "Oh, and Mum," she added, her tone shifting, Try not to bring up the past, the old stories about how Dad started the business and all. People are here to celebrate the new generation. I smiled. Of course. I've learned to let the past speak for itself. She nodded, not catching the weight behind those words. The tables were arranged in perfect symmetry. Each name was printed in gold lettering. I found mine near the end, Mrs. H. Crawford. No founder, no owner, just an initial, like a footnote. I took my seat quietly. Across the room I could see David making a toast tea to a group of investors. He wore a navy suit, crisp and tailored. Every gesture of his hand looked borrowed from someone else's success. Mark joined him, laughing loudly, as if the sound could drown out memory. The lights dimmed, and the host, one of their business partners, took the stage. Tonight, he began, we celebrate the future of the Crawford family legacy, a company that represents growth, innovation, and a story of hard work passed down through generations. Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. When the host mentioned Arthur's name, there was a murmur of respect. When he mentioned David and Mark, the crowd cheered. My name never came. A small pain flickered through me, but I swallowed it, the way I always had. Endurance had become muscle memory. After the speeches, Clara took the microphone. I just want to say how proud I am of this family, she said. We've come a long way, from a small-town trucking service to a national brand. It's been years of dedication and smart decisions. My husband and his brother have truly turned things around. Turn things around. The phrase lingered like smoke. I thought of Arthur's trembling hands signing the ownership transfer, of the nights he coughed in his sleep while I calculated margins by candlelight, of the truck payments we scraped together by skipping doctor visits. She continued, smiling. And of course, we couldn't have done any of this without the support of our dear mum. She looked in my direction, her tone coated in sugar. She taught us the value of hard work. Even if she never really understood business, she always believed in us. Laughter rippled gently, polite but real. I could feel heat rising in my face, but I didn't move. Years of restraint held me still. My teacup rested before me again, half full, its surface trembling from the bass of the music. When the music resumed, Mark came over. Hey, Mom, he said casually. Clara didn't mean it like that. You know how she is. I know exactly how she is, I said. My voice was calm, but my heart felt like it was counting something invisible, seconds maybe, or limits. He smiled awkwardly. We just want you to relax. You've done enough worrying in your life. Let us handle things now. Enough. That word again, the one that erased decades with a single syllable. Later that evening, a group of guests gathered near my table. They were discussing a recent award the company had won. The Crawford boys really built something impressive, one man said. I heard they started from nothing. I turned my head slightly. They didn't start from nothing, I said softly. The man looked surprised. Oh, were you involved with the company? I smiled. In more ways than they remember. He laughed politely, assuming I was joking. Well, it must be wonderful to see how far they've come. Yes, I replied. It's always interesting to watch how far borrowed ladders can reach. He didn't understand, but I didn't expect him to. Truth rarely announces itself in crowded rooms. By the time dessert was served, the humiliation had turned to stillness. I felt something inside me shift. Not rage, not revenge, but the slow tightening of purpose. As the night ended, David gave a final toast. To family, he said, to progress, and to the next chapter of Crawford Logistics, the company our father dreamed of, and we've made real. Applause again, cameras again, Flash after flash, little explosions of light against decades of shadows. After the event, David insisted on driving me home. I sat beside him, the city lights sliding across the windshield like ghosts. He talked the whole way about profits, expansions, and investors. I listened, nodding occasionally. "You should be proud, Mum," he said. "Dad would be. I mean, we've taken everything he built and made it bigger, better. It's practically unrecognizable now." "Yes," I said quietly. "Unrecognizable." When he dropped me off, I stood on the porch for a long moment after his car drove away. The night air felt heavy, the kind that presses on your chest until you speak, but I didn't. Not yet. Inside, the house was silent. I took off my shoes, hung up my coat, and walked straight to the bedroom. The moonlight spilled across the floor, pale and certain. I knelt beside the cedar chest and unlocked it. The hinges creaked softly, like an old friend clearing its throat. The envelope lay exactly where I had left it. Sealed again, untouched, patient. I took it out, laid it on the bed, and sat beside it. My fingers traced the edges. Arthur's handwriting stared back at me. For Helen, in case they forget. They had forgotten. Entirely. I opened the envelope. The papers inside gleamed faintly under the light. Ownership transfer, signatures, dates, seals. Every line a witness. I read them again and again until the words stopped feeling like ink and started feeling like breath. These weren't just legal forms, they were proof that sacrifice had a name, and it was mine. I thought about the laughter, the toasts, the condescension disguised as affection. I thought about Clara's voice saying I didn't understand business. I thought about David saying I should let go of the past. The past was all that kept them standing, and they didn't even know it. I placed the documents carefully back into the envelope and pressed my palm over it, whispering, "You waited long enough." The next morning, I called Mr. Hawthorne, my lawyer. His secretary answered, surprised to hear my voice. "Mr. Hawthorne is in a meeting," she said. "Tell him Helen Crawford called," I replied, "and that it's time." When he returned the call, his tone was cautious but respectful. "Helen, are you sure you want to proceed?" "Yes," I said. "I've stayed quiet long enough. Silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just the last refuge of the disappointed." He nodded through the phone. "Then we'll prepare the verification documents. You have every legal right. You just need to decide when to reveal it." "I already know," I said. "At the next board meeting." For the rest of that week, I lived between two worlds. The visible one, where I smiled and baked pies for the grandchildren, and the hidden one, where power rested quietly in an envelope under my bed. Every time I saw David or Mark's names in the news, every time I heard them talk about their company, I felt less anger and more inevitability. They had built castles on my foundation, but the keys were still in my hands. On Friday evening, Clara called to invite me to lunch. "Let's start fresh, Mum," she said sweetly. "We've all said things we didn't mean." I agreed, though I knew her words were oil floating on water. She met me at a restaurant overlooking the river, all smiles and perfume. "You looked upset at the party," she began. "I just hope you know we love you, even if we tease you sometimes." "Of course," I said, stirring my tea. "Families tease, and sometimes they forget." She laughed lightly. "Forget what?" "Who taught them to count?" She blinked, unsure if I was joking. "Oh, Mum, you're too sentimental." "Maybe," I said, "but sentiment built your house." Her smile faltered, just slightly, and it was enough. When I returned home, I felt calm. Not triumphant. Calm, like the air before rain. Arthur's photo on the mantel seemed to watch me with quiet approval. I stood before it and whispered, "I'm done waiting for gratitude. Now they'll see what real work looks like." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. I walked to the window and watched the trees sway. Every storm begins quietly, with a shift in the wind, a gathering of patience. That night, I slept without dreams. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying silence. I was carrying truth. And truth, I've learned, has its own heartbeat. Slow, unstoppable. The following Monday, the city woke up to rain, the kind of rain that blurs outlines, softens noise, and makes even truth look hazy. I watched it from my kitchen window, steam rising from my tea, and thought how strange it is that storms outside always make the storms inside easier to bear. That morning the phone rang. It was Mr. Hawthorne. "Everything's confirmed," he said. "The ownership is entirely under your name. You have the original deed, and we've verified it against the government archives. It's airtight, Helen." A quiet relief filled the room. It wasn't joy. It was the exhale of 40 years finally taking shape. "Thank you," I said. "There's one more thing," he added. "You should know, your sons have been authorizing large withdrawals under company expenses. New cars, overseas trips, property down payments, all charged to business accounts." "I see," I murmured. My heart didn't race. It simply steadied. "Can you get me copies?" "I already have," he replied. "I'll send them by courier today." After the call ended, I stood for a long time in silence. The teapot still whistled softly, the rain still fell, but something inside me shifted again. This time, it wasn't patience, it was precision. By noon, the courier arrived. I opened the envelope slowly, as if handling old memories. Inside were statements, invoices, transfers, all bearing familiar signatures. My son's handwriting looked bold and careless, the way arrogance always writes. For years, I had been their silent witness. Now, for the first time, I was their quiet accountant again. Only this time, I was counting debts they didn't know existed. That evening, I called the company accountant, a kind man named Peter who had worked under me when I still managed finances. He answered with surprise. "Mrs. Crawford, it's been ages." "How are the books, Peter?" I asked lightly. He hesitated. "Busy, Ma'am. There's been a lot of movement lately. Expansion plans, new ventures." "Expansion or expenditure?" He paused. "Honestly, more of the latter." I smiled faintly. "Peter, would you mind having lunch with me tomorrow? Off the record." He agreed. The next day, we met at a quiet diner near the old freight yard, the same one where Arthur and I once celebrated our first contract. Peter looked tired, older than I remembered. His eyes darted around nervously. "I hope this isn't about trouble," he said. "Not yet," I replied. "Tell me what you can." He sighed, lowering his voice. "They've been transferring company funds into personal accounts for months. I've raised concerns, but Mark told me to stay out of it, said you'd approved everything before you retired." I let the words settle like dust. "I haven't approved anything in 20 years, I said. He nodded, ashamed. "I figured as much." "Peter," I said gently, "I need copies of everything. Every questionable transfer, every fake approval, every invoice that doesn't smell right, quietly." He hesitated. "That could cost me my job." "It might save your conscience," I said. "And in the end, that's worth more." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Give me a week." When he left, I sat there alone, tracing circles on the table with my fingertip. The smell of coffee and old wood filled the air. I thought of Arthur again, how he used to say, "Numbers never lie, but people do." He'd been right. That night, I opened the cedar chest again and placed the new documents beside the ownership papers. The chest was beginning to feel like a vault for justice. Days passed quietly. On the surface, life continued. Calls from Clara about family dinners, texts from Mark asking for small favours, invitations I politely declined. Beneath it all, a silent audit unfolded. A week later, Peter called. "I have everything," he said. "And, Mrs. Crawford, It's worse than I thought. He met me again, this time with a folder so thick it could have been a novel about betrayal. They've been covering losses with personal bonuses, using your name as reference for approvals. If this reaches the board, they could lose control of everything. I nodded calmly. They already have. That evening, I sat by the window with the folder open, line by line, revealing just how deep selfishness had rooted itself. I wasn't angry anymore. I was analytical, measured, methodical. It's strange how betrayal, when seen on paper, loses its ability to wound. It becomes arithmetic. Later that night, I found an email in my inbox, sent accidentally by Mark. It was a message chain between him and Clara. Mom's being sentimental again. She still thinks she owns part of this company. Just humour her. Honestly, she's lucky we let her keep that house. If she knew how tight cash flow was, she'd finally give up the title. We'll handle it soon. Maybe convince her to sign over whatever's left for estate planning. My hands trembled slightly, not with sadness, but with recognition. This was exactly the moment Arthur had warned me about. The moment when affection turns into acquisition. I printed the email and slipped it into the folder. Paper doesn't forget. 2 days later, I made an appointment with Mr. Hawthorne again. When I arrived, he greeted me with a respectful bow of the head. "You've gathered quite a case, Kate," he said, flipping through the documents. "If you wanted to take this to court, you'd win." "I don't want court," I said. "I want truth, publicly and completely." He looked intrigued. "You plan to reveal it yourself?" "Yes, at the upcoming shareholders' meeting. I believe Clara is already planning another speech." He smiled faintly. "Then this will be a better one." That night, I walked through my home touching old photographs, Arthur in his work boots, the boys in school uniforms, my own younger face smiling despite exhaustion. Every image carried a promise, and I realized how long I had lived protecting promises no one else remembered. The next week brought more tension. Rumors began circulating that the company was under financial review. Clara called me in a panic. "Mum, did you talk to someone?" she demanded. "The auditors are asking questions about old filings." "Are they?" I said calmly. "Yes, they're digging into transfers, taxes, everything. What's going on?" "Maybe truth is just doing its own accounting," I said softly. She exhaled sharply. "This isn't funny, Mum. We could lose everything." "Then maybe it's time you learn what losing feels like," I replied. "It's a good teacher." She hung up without another word. That same evening, David showed up at my house unannounced. He looked furious. "What are you doing?" he demanded, slamming the door behind him. "We're being audited. The lawyers are asking questions about your name on old documents. You couldn't just let things be, could you?" I looked at him, the same son I once rocked to sleep when fever burned his skin. "Sit down, David," I said quietly. "I'm not sitting," he snapped. "You don't know how business works anymore." "On the contrary," I said. "I know exactly how it works. I built it." He blinked. "You what?" I reached for the cedar chest, opened it, and took out the envelope. The papers glowed under the lamp's light. "Arthur transferred full ownership to me before he died. These are the deeds. The company you claim as yours still legally belongs to me." His face went pale. "That's impossible. The documents are right here," I interrupted. "Filed, sealed, notarized, and verified." He took a step back, shaking his head. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because I thought love would be stronger than greed," I said. He stared at me, speechless. For a moment I saw something familiar in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. But it vanished quickly. "If you do anything to embarrass us publicly, you'll destroy the company." "No," I said calmly. "You already did that. I'm just turning on the lights." He left without another word, the door slamming behind him. The house trembled, but I didn't. That night, I sat at my desk writing a letter to my grandchildren. "My dears, one day You'll hear many stories about who built this family's fortune. Believe whichever you like, but remember this. Real wealth isn't measured in what you take, but in what you preserve. I kept something safe for you, not just money, but truth. When you're old enough, you'll understand why silence was my loudest choice. I sealed the letter and placed it in the chest beside the ownership papers. A few days later, Peter called again. Mrs. Crawford, I don't know what you did, but things are changing. Auditors are reviewing every file. Some staff are panicking. Let them, I said. A house built on borrowed walls always shakes when truth knocks. He chuckled softly, admiration in his voice. You're something else, Mrs. Crawford. Not something else, I said. Just finally myself. As the audit deepened, more discrepancies surfaced. False invoices, missing receipts, fake consultant payments. Every lie documented itself, neatly, like confession on paper. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had used my name to steal, and now my name would end the theft. Meanwhile, Clara stopped calling. David avoided me. Only Mark sent a brief message. Mom, I think we've made a mess. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Some lessons don't need words, they need weight. The day before the board meeting, I laid out my documents on the dining table like a general preparing for battle. Not with rage, but with order. Each page was a lifetime, each signature a boundary they had crossed. I made myself tea in the cracked cup, the same one that had witnessed their laughter. The crack had widened slightly, but the cup still held. I whispered to it, half smiling. We've both lasted longer than they thought. When dawn came, I dressed in a navy suit, the one Arthur loved. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like renewal. As I left the house, I locked the door and glanced back once. Keep watch, I murmured to Arthur's photograph on the mantel. This is for both of us. The car ride to the office felt different this time. I wasn't visiting as a mother. I was arriving as the owner, the rightful one. By the time I reached the building, the staff were whispering. Cameras flashed. Journalists lingered outside, sensing tension. Peter met me at the door, his face pale but determined. They're all inside, he said, waiting. I nodded. Good. It's time. As I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heels echoed sharply against the floor, steady, deliberate, unhurried. The same sound I once made running numbers in that very building decades ago. Only now, each step carried a different weight. The door to the boardroom opened. I entered quietly. Every face turned toward me. Shock, guilt, arrogance, fear, all lined up like unbalanced columns. Clara whispered something to David, who stiffened. Mom, he began, voice strained. His isn't the place. Oh, I said, setting the envelope on the table. I believe it's exactly the place. And for the first time in 40 years, silence belonged to me. For a long moment, no one in the boardroom spoke. Only the low hum of the ceiling fan filled the air, slicing the silence into fragments. I stood at the head of the table, the same place Arthur once stood decades ago when this company was just 2 trucks and a dream. Now the walls gleamed with plaques and framed awards, testaments to a success story built on selective memory. I looked at each of them, my sons, their wives, the shareholders, and the lawyers they had hired. David's jaw was tight, Mark's eyes downcast, Clara's lips pressed into a nervous smile. Please, I said softly. Sit. They obeyed. The lawyer at the far end, a man named Mr. Green, cleared his throat. Mrs. Crawford, perhaps we can resolve this privately. There's no need to— There's every need, I interrupted gently. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. For years, you've all spoken in rooms like this about progress, growth, legacy. You've given speeches about my late husband's vision and your own brilliance. But there's one word you've never spoken here. Truth. I opened the envelope. The rustle of paper sounded louder than any of their voices. These, I said, spreading the documents across the table, are the original ownership deeds of Crawford Logistics, signed by Arthur Crawford, dated 1994, legally transferring full control to me, Helen Crawford, not to David, not to Mark, not to anyone else. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Clara blinked rapidly. That can't be real. We've been managing this company for 20 years. Yes, I replied. Managing, not owning. Mr. Green leaned forward. With all due respect, Mrs. Crawford, this is highly irregular. Nothing irregular about it, I said calmly, sliding a second document toward him. Government-certified copy, verified by my attorney, Mr. Hawthorne. Would you like to call him? He's waiting downstairs. David's face turned, and a shade of grey I hadn't seen before. Mum, he began, forcing a smile, maybe we can discuss this later. You don't understand how this will look. I understand perfectly, I said. It will look like what it is, a family that built its wealth on one woman's silence. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to see who you'd become when you thought I had nothing, I said quietly. Turns out money doesn't change people. It just shows what they were hiding. A murmur spread among the shareholders. Someone whispered, "She's the legal owner?" Another said, "If that's true, all contracts need review." Clara stood suddenly, her voice sharp. "This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and claim everything after all these years. You didn't run the business, David did." I turned to her, meeting her fury with calm. "You're right, Clara. I didn't run it. I built it, brick by brick, invoice by invoice, while you were busy buying handbags that cost more than our first office chair." Laughter flickered somewhere in the back, quickly stifled. I placed another set of papers on the table. Here are the transfer records your husband and his brother authorized over the past 3 years. All illegal, all using my name for approval. The audit found everything. David's voice cracked. "You had us audited?" "No," I said, smiling faintly. "The truth did." The lawyer scanned the documents, his face draining of colour. "These are authentic," he muttered. "Her name is on every original file." I leaned slightly forward, my palms resting on the table. For 40 years, I worked in the shadows, not because I was weak, but because I thought love was enough. But love without respect is just servitude in prettier clothes. Clara's composure broke. "You're ruining us," she shouted. "Everything we've built." "Everything you've taken," I corrected softly. "And I'm not ruining you, Clara. I'm freeing you from lies. You should thank me." David buried his face in his hands. "Mom, please, don't do this publicly. You'll humiliate us." I stared at him, remembering the child who once brought me wildflowers from the yard, the teenager who hugged me after Arthur's funeral. "I didn't humiliate you, David," I said. "You did that the day you forgot who taught you how to count." Mark finally spoke, his voice trembling. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we correct the records. The company remains in operation, but under rightful management." Mr. Green cleared his throat again. "You mean to say, Mrs. Crawford, you're reinstating yourself as CEO?" I smiled, shaking my head. "No, I have no interest in titles. I'm appointing someone who still believes in integrity. Peter from accounting. He's been the only one keeping your damage under control." The shock on their faces was almost poetic. "He'll serve as interim director while I review the books," I continued. "As for you, David, you and Clara will step down effective immediately." Clara gasped. "You can't fire us." "Technically I can," I said gently. "You're employees, and insubordination has consequences." David slammed his fist on the table. "You can't do this. You'll destroy the family." "The family destroyed itself," I said. "I'm just reading the autopsy." The room fell silent again. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. One of the shareholders, an older woman named Mrs. Grant, who had known Arthur personally, finally spoke. "Helen," she said softly, "I remember when you used to come to board meetings with stacks of handwritten reports. Arthur always said you were the brains behind the business." I nodded slightly. Arthur saw what others chose not to. He believed in patience, not pity. She smiled faintly. "Then it's about time patience got its reward." A few people clapped quietly, not in mockery, but in respect. The sound grew, hesitant at first, then steady. It wasn't applause for power, it was applause for justice. David rose abruptly and stormed out of the room, Clara close behind. Mark stayed seated, tears glistening in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I didn't know how to stop it." I reached out, placing my hand over his. "You stop it now," I said, "by being better than them." He nodded, shoulders shaking. After the meeting, I walked out into the sunlight. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, microphones reached forward like hungry mouths. I ignored them all. The truth had already spoken. I didn't need to. Inside the building, chaos unfolded. Calls, resignations, retractions. But outside, the air was clean, sharp, honest. For the first time in years, I breathed without weight. Peter caught up with me near the steps. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, still astonished. "You actually did it." "I only returned what was already mine," I said. "But I hope the next generation learns that ownership isn't just about names on paper, it's about character." He nodded, emotion thick in his voice. "I'll do my best to honor what you built." "I know you will," I said, handing him a small brass key. "Arthur's old desk. Inside, you'll find a notebook. Keep it close. It has more wisdom than most boardrooms." He accepted it reverently. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the parking lot watching employees leave the building. Some looked uncertain, others relieved. I saw the janitor, Mr. Lewis, who had been with us since the beginning. He noticed me and waved. He walked over to my window. "Mrs. Crawford, I heard what happened. About time, Ma'am. Mr. Arthur would be proud." "Thank you, Lewis," I said. He always believed the truth would find its way. He smiled, tipping his cap. "It always does, Ma'am. Sometimes it just needs a map." When I got home, the sky was beginning to turn gold. I set my bag down and went straight to the mantel. Arthur's photograph watched me from its frame, the same quiet smile as always. "Well," I said aloud, "we did it. The truth finally stood up." For a moment I imagined his voice again, soft, teasing. "Took you long enough, Helen." I laughed through tears. "Yes," I whispered, but the waiting made it sweeter. Later that evening, the news broke. Founder's widow reclaims company ownership after 40 years. I didn't read the comments or the praise. I didn't need validation from strangers. My victory was private, personal, carved from patience, sealed with integrity. Claire. Ara called once, hysterical. I let it ring. David sent a message full of half apologies and veiled accusations. I didn't respond. Silence was my new language, and it spoke louder than their noise ever could. Instead, I made tea, the same cracked cup, the same familiar warmth. I sat by the window as the first stars appeared, their light gentle and ancient. People think revenge is loud, that it shouts and burns and destroys. But real justice is quiet. It stands tall in silence, unshaken, letting the guilty crumble under their own echoes. As I sipped, I noticed the reflection of my face in the glass. Older, lined, but serene. For years they had called me poor. Tonight, I was the richest woman in the city, and not because of money. Because truth had finally come home. Before bed, I wrote one final note in my ledger, the same one I'd used since Arthur's days. Final balance, dignity restored, accounts settled. Then I closed it, turned off the lamp, and whispered into the dark. Arthur, they laughed once, remember? But I think the laughter's quiet now. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, soft and approving. Justice had been served, not through anger, but through endurance. And endurance, I realized, was the most beautiful kind of revenge. The next morning felt different. Not triumphant, not loud, just lighter. Like the air after a storm when the clouds are still rearranging themselves, but the worst has already passed. For the first time in decades, I woke without an alarm, without that invisible weight on my chest. The house was quiet, yet every corner seemed to hum with something new, freedom. I brewed tea and opened the curtains. Outside, the street glistened from last night's rain, the light pooling like spilled honey on the asphalt. I thought of Arthur, how he used to say, "Peace doesn't arrive with applause, Helen. It just walks in when the noise is done." He was right again. By noon, the phone began ringing. Journalists, lawyers, board members, all hungry for quotes, confirmations, explanations. I ignored them all. I had no interest in public spectacle. I'd already done what needed to be done. When Peter called, I picked up. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, voice bright. "The transition is underway. Employees are signing new contracts under your authorization. We've cleaned up the expense accounts. The board's in full support." "Good," I said. "Let the company breathe again." He hesitated. "There's something else. The staff, they're inspired, ma'am. They're calling you the quiet founder. Someone printed your picture and pinned it in the hallway." I smiled faintly. "Take it down." He sounded surprised. "Take it down?" "Yes. No shrines. Just good work." When I hung up, I sat for a while staring at the photo of Arthur on the mantel. "It's done," I whispered. "We built something honest again." But endings, I've learned, don't arrive cleanly. They come with echoes. That evening, Mark came by. He looked older, thinner, humbled. "Mum," he said, standing awkwardly at the door, "can we talk?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. He walked in slowly, eyes scanning the living room like it was the first time he'd really seen it. "I heard David and Clara moved out of their house," he said quietly. "The bank froze their accounts." "I'm aware," I said, setting a cup of tea before him. He took it, but didn't drink. "He's angry, Mom. But deep down I think he knows it's his fault. He just doesn't know how to say sorry." "Then silence will teach him what words can't," I said. Mark nodded. "I came to tell you something. I want to stay. I want to help rebuild the company the right way." For a long moment I looked at him, really looked. The boy who once cried when he broke his toy truck, now a man who had broken something far bigger. "If you're sincere," I said, "start by listening more than you speak." "I will," he said softly. "Then maybe you'll be worthy of carrying the name again." He smiled faintly, relief in his eyes. "Thank you, Mum." When he left, I stood at the window watching his car disappear down the street. It struck me how strange it is that healing doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly, one humbled heart at a time. Over the next few weeks, the company began to transform. Peter, now interim director, introduced transparency policies. Salaries were adjusted fairly. Old employees who had been mistreated were rehired. And for the first time in years, the staff meetings began with gratitude, not ego. I visited occasionally, never as the boss, but as the witness. The office looked brighter. Even the logo I once designed in ink now hung in gold on the lobby wall. When I walked past it, a few employees clapped. I waved them off gently. On one of those visits, a young intern approached me shyly. "Mrs. Crawford," she said, "my grandmother used to talk about you. She said you were the woman who ran the numbers before computers did, the one who never made a single mistake." I chuckled softly. Oh, I made plenty. I just didn't repeat them. She smiled. You're the reason I stewed. Died accounting. People forget that numbers have stories. You reminded me. Her words warmed me more than any applause could. That afternoon, Peter invited me to his office. We're drafting a new mission statement, he said. Would you like to review it? I read the line aloud. Crawford Logistics, built on integrity, guided by patience. It's perfect, I said. He nodded, smiling. We wanted something that honors how this company truly began. When I left the building that day, the sunlight hit the glass doors just right. My reflection appeared alongside the company's name, two legacies intertwined. For the first time, it felt complete. But outside of business, life was quieter. The neighborhood children waved when they saw me in the garden. Some of the old employees dropped by with groceries or flowers, insisting I deserved comfort. I didn't argue. Sometimes kindness is best received with silence. David, however, didn't visit. Weeks passed, then months. Rumors spread. He had left town, perhaps to escape embarrassment. Clara sold her jewelry, tried to start something new, failed. Their pride had been too heavy to carry and too fragile to last. One evening, as I watered the roses, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I answered anyway. "Mum," a trembling voice said. It was David. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I was wrong," he whispered. "All of it. I didn't understand what you did for us. I thought success was proof that I'd done better than you. But now I see it was all built on what you gave." I closed my eyes. The night breeze moved gently through the roses, carrying their scent like forgiveness. "David," I said, "you were never supposed to compete with me. You were supposed to continue me." He choked back tears. "Can I come home?" "You already have," I said softly. "Just live differently." That was enough. After that call, something inside me unclenched. Anger, pain, humiliation. They all dissolved like sugar in warm tea. What remained was understanding. Justice had done its work. Forgiveness was ready to begin. The next morning, I visited the company again. Not for business, just to see. The lobby was busy but peaceful. People smiled as they passed me. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered my name like a prayer. Peter met me with a grin. "We've implemented new mentorship programs," he said. "We call them the Crawford Circles, young employees paired with seniors to learn not just skills but values." "Values," I repeated. "Arthur would like that." He nodded. "There's more. The board unanimously voted to dedicate the new training hall to you. It'll be called the Helen Crawford Center for Ethical Business." I froze for a moment, overwhelmed. "I told you I didn't want shrines." He smiled. "This isn't a shrine, it's a reminder." I laughed softly. "Then let it remind them that humility pays better than greed." That afternoon, I stood in the hall bearing my name. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the gold letters on the plaque. Beneath it was a quote they'd chosen from one of my old ledgers. "Integrity is the only inheritance that never depreciates." I ran my fingers over the words, feeling Arthur beside me. "We left them something good after all," I whispered. Later that week, Mark invited me to a small family dinner at his house. "Just a few of us," he said. "No speeches, no champagne." When I arrived, the table was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, candles flickering softly. His wife, Emily, greeted me warmly. Even David was there, sitting quietly at the far end, eyes lowered. The meal began in silence. Then David stood, cleared his throat and said, "Before we eat, I want to say something." Everyone froze. He turned toward me. "Mom, you gave us everything, and we gave you embarrassment. I can't undo what I did, but I can live differently from now on. I want to rebuild, not the company, but the family." I felt tears rise but didn't hide them. Then let's start by eating, I said softly. No past, no punishment, just peace. He smiled, a genuine, weary smile. For the first time in years, I saw my son again, not the stranger success had created. We ate slowly, sharing stories of Arthur, laughing at small memories. Every bite felt like healing. When the evening ended, David walked me to the door. "You're still the strongest person I know," he said. "I'm just practiced at standing up slowly," I replied. He nodded. "Thank you for giving me another chance." "You earned it by asking," I said. He hugged me, a quiet, trembling embrace. For a moment, all the noise of the past melted away. That night, when I returned home, I sat on the porch with my tea, the moon high above. The roses swayed gently in the breeze. I thought about everything that had happened, the laughter, the betrayal, the reckoning, the peace. Life, I realized, is just a long conversation between silence and truth. And sometimes silence wins, but only when truth gives it a voice. In the weeks that followed, the company flourished. The community respected it again, not for its profits, but for its principles. Younger employees began calling it the honest company. The phrase made me smile. One morning, a journalist wrote an article titled, "The Woman Who Built Empires Out of Patience." I didn't read it, but Peter summarized it for me. "They're calling you a legend," he said. "I'm just a reminder," I replied, "that quiet doesn't mean powerless." On the first anniversary of the ownership restoration, the staff organized a small ceremony. They planted a magnolia tree in front of the main office, dedicating it to Arthur and me. The plaque read, "For Helen and Arthur Crawford, who taught us that roots matter more than crowns." As they lowered the tree into the soil, I placed my hand on its stem. The bark was smooth, new, full of promise. "Grow slow," I whispered, "but grow honest." When I got home that evening, I found an envelope on my porch. Inside was a note from David. "Mum, I bought back your old teacup. Clara had sold it years ago. I found it at an antique shop." Beneath the note was the cup itself, the same one, the same crack running through its side. I traced it gently with my thumb, smiling. It was imperfect, but whole enough to hold warmth again. That night, I brewed tea, set the cup on the table, and opened my ledger one last time. Under the final entry, I wrote, "After 40 years of sacrifice, the math balanced itself. Love repaid, truth restored, peace earned." Then I closed it, leaned back, and watched the candle flicker beside Arthur's picture. Outside, the magnolia leaves rustled softly in the wind, whispering a lullaby to the night. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Because everything I had waited for, respect, justice, peace, was already sitting quietly in my house, sipping tea with me. Before we reach Helen's final moment of peace, tell us, do you believe silence is strength, or does it come with a price? Leave your answer in the comments and join our community where truth and dignity always win in the end. Spring returned gently that year. The magnolia tree outside my window had already begun to bloom, its white petals opening like quiet forgiveness. The air carried the smell of wet soil and new beginnings. I spent most mornings on the porch now, watching sunlight stretch across the garden, as if trying to make up for lost time. Life had grown still again, but not empty. There's a difference between loneliness and peace. Loneliness waits for someone. Peace simply sits and breathes. Every few days, a package or a letter would arrive. A framed photograph from Peter showing the company's new training hall. A card from an employee who wrote, "You taught me patience when I wanted speed." A letter from Mark telling me the staff had voted to implement profit sharing for drivers. Even David wrote sometimes, short notes full of humility that felt heavier than any apology. Mum, I'm volunteering at the food bank now. Feels good to do something that doesn't need a receipt. Each time I read their words and smiled. Healing isn't loud. It's a whisper repeated enough times to become truth. One afternoon, I went into town to buy groceries. People greeted me differently now, not with pity, but with respect. The cashier, a young man with kind eyes, handed me my change carefully and said, "My grandmother told me your story, Ma'am. She said you taught the whole city that patience pays." I chuckled softly. "Tell her patience is just another word for practice." He laughed. "Still, it's rare these days. Everyone wants victory by Friday." "Then they'll miss the kind that lasts," I said, and walked out into the sunlight. At home, I placed a single magnolia flower in a vase on the kitchen table. Its scent reminded me of Arthur. I could almost hear his voice. "You always did love simple things, Helen." "Yes," I murmured, "because simple things tell the truth." That evening, I sat by the window, with the cracked teacup, now perfectly glued by David himself. The line of repair shimmered faintly in the lamplight, a golden thread tracing where fragility once lived. I had told him not to fix it, but he insisted. "Let it show," he said, "so we remember how it broke." He was right. Scars are proof that something tried to heal. The company continued to flourish under Peter's guidance. Quarterly reports arrived at my door, though I rarely opened them. Profit was no longer my language. Peace was. Yet one letter I did open, a handwritten note from the newest intern. "Mrs. Crawford, I joined because of you. I wanted to work in a place where truth still mattered. Thank you for reminding us that success can be gentle." I read it twice, then folded it carefully into my old ledger. That book had held numbers for decades. Now it held gratitude. Sometimes in the evenings I'd see neighbours walking their dogs past my house. Children would stop to point at the magnolia tree and ask whose name was on the plaque beneath it. Their parents would tell them softly, "She's the woman who built the company that gave our town jobs." I never corrected them. A story belongs to whoever learns from it. One Sunday, the local church invited me to speak at a charity luncheon. I hesitated. I'd spent a lifetime avoiding microphones, but Mark persuaded me. "Mom," he said, "you don't need to teach them business. Just tell them what patience costs." So I stood before a room full of women, mothers, widows, young workers, and told them the truth. Not the grand, cinematic version, but the small, steady one. "I thought silence would keep my family safe," I said, "but silence can also teach people to stop listening. I learned that sacrifice without boundaries becomes surrender, and surrender, if you let it go on too long, looks a lot like obedience. Don't let the world mistake your kindness for emptiness." They listened quietly. Some cried. When I finished, there was no applause, just stillness. The good kind. Afterward, an older woman approached me. "You remind me of myself," she said. "I raised 3 sons, worked all my life, and they still call me dependent." I took her hand gently. "Then remind them what you built. Respect can't be demanded, but it can be proven." She smiled through tears. "You make it sound so simple." "It isn't," I said, "but it's possible." That night, back home, I sat in the garden under the magnolia tree. Fireflies flickered in the dark like little confessions. I thought about every version of myself, the young accountant, the grieving widow, the silent mother, the woman who finally spoke. Each one had paid a price to become the next. The price of respect isn't money or status, it's endurance. The courage to stand alone until truth decides to stand with you. Inside, the clock ticked softly. I poured one last cup of tea and whispered, "Arthur, I finally understand what you meant all those years ago." His voice echoed only in memory, but it was enough. Respect isn't given, Helen. It's returned. I smiled, and I waited long enough to see it come home. The wind moved through the magnolia branches, scattering petals across the porch like blessings. The smell of earth and tea filled the air. I looked around my quiet house, the photos, the letters, the repaired cup, the ledger resting close, it on the table, and realized something profound. I had nothing left to prove, and everything left to cherish. Tomorrow, the sun would rise again over Crawford Logistics, shining on a company reborn in honesty. But I didn't need to be there. My work was finished, my lesson taught. I leaned back in the chair, watching dawn's first hint of light creep across the horizon, and said softly to the morning, "All debts are paid, all accounts are even, and my heart, at last, is in the black." The magnolia petals shimmered in the golden light, each one carrying the quiet truth that had taken a lifetime to bloom.